back to Women in Politics with your host, Jacqueline Gomes Neves. On this episode of Women in Politics, we will be discussing leadership and feeling empowered. Sometimes in politics, a lot of us do not feel empowered, or in life, we don't feel empowered to speak our truth, to stand up for what we believe in. And so this is a discussion that is so very much needed. And today we're looking at leadership and feeling empowered from the top level and from the bottom. So what it looks like when you're starting out and you're finding your voice and you're getting your voice heard, right through to when you're in a political role and your voice holds professional power. So to have that conversation, I've got here with me two very special guests, Precious and Sarah Alonge. Sarah is a policy advisor at the Law Society, and Precious is a 16-year-old student who is just about to go into studying her A-levels. Hi girls, ladies.
Hi.
How are you guys?
Doing well, thank you.
Good. So the reason why these two guests are really special to me is because Precious very much reminds me of the 16-year-old me. I was coming into my community, I saw a lot of things going wrong, and I didn't know where to go, but I knew I had a voice. And I've heard Precious speak before on a previous episode, and she just really blew me away. And Sarah, she's top level, she's policy advisor, really leading in that field. And she knows a lot about leadership and she advises on a professional level. And so, Sarah, what's it like from a professional level advising on policy at a very prestigious institution?
So advising on policy is something that I've been doing for quite a while now, and in recent times, the area that I've been looking at a lot is around the protected characteristics, with a particular focus on diversity and inclusion and looking at gender. And it's quite interesting that you mentioned before women in leadership, and last year the government launched the gender pay gap, and the disparities that we saw between men earners and women earners, and how a large part of my role is around preparing organisations and preparing the legal sector essentially to be able to not only assess the gap but address the gap as well. So
and we have a social mobility issue at the moment. So
we have a social mobility issue. We have a brain issue.
Exactly.
We have so many issues in the workplace, and it's so important that we have these conversations and that the government back these conversations. So it was a great step for the government to take the initiative to do the gender pay gap review. They're looking at doing a brain review in a few years, and even with social mobility, the government have provided guidance recently on how to measure social mobility, just so that employers are not employing the 7% of people who are primary school educated.
Yeah, and on that, I recently saw the Social Mobility Commission recently launched a few reports. And those reports show that since 2010, social mobility has been stagnant in the UK. And the statistic says around 80% of young people who are coming from deprived backgrounds do not have hope to move up the social ladder. So Precious, hearing that 80% of young people coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, from poorer backgrounds, it's a statistic. They're not making it. They're not moving up. They're not starting out here and seeing better for themselves or moving up the career ladder. How does that make you feel as a young person starting to, studying your A-levels and moving forward? How does that make you feel?
I feel like with young people, our lives, depending on what family you're born into, where we are born, our lives are already made out for us. So I feel like you can be very based, you can be very judged based on where you live. Where you live will give someone an automatic idea of who you are and what's the most you'll ever become.
So where are you from?
I'm from Croydon, South London.
Okay, so do you feel like where people judge you knowing that you're from Croydon, do you feel like your opportunities are capped because you're from Croydon? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I do feel like that, because even me, I knew that my opportunities I didn't have any opportunities when I actually got opportunities. So me being in Croydon without actually knowing anything, I wouldn't realize that, okay, there's actually opportunities out there that I have access to without actually being given access to those opportunities in the first place.
Because no one tells you there's opportunities.
Yeah, because because where we are, people themselves, the older people or the older generation from where we are, don't have access to opportunities anyways.
Okay. So there's a cap in terms of what you're seeing.
Yeah.
And if you can't see, you can't aspire to be, right?
Yeah, so it just ends up becoming a chain of very limited generations of people. So us as a generation, we are now limited as young people.
So you feel limited?
Yeah, young people can feel very, very limited based on the fact that we just don't have any other option because we aren't shown any other option to be anything else.
It's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that, Sarah?
It's a vicious cycle, and I think what you're saying is completely accurate. The area that you live in will determine the school you go to.
Absolutely.
Will determine the peers that you have. The school you go to then determines the grades that you achieve. It then determines if you go on to do higher education, it then determines the higher education institution you go to. And then you have a social disparity because of one person went to a Russell Group university and another person didn't. One person did A-levels and another person did BTEC.
And just what you're talking about at home.
Exactly.
One person talks about politics and business around the dinner table with their parents because their parents is a lawyer.
Whereas the other person, their parents may be doing two jobs because they don't have the financial liberty or freedom. And even, you speak to the kind of work that I do, and I've written loads of campaigns for a number of different organisations. So I'm talking about like Barclays to City to massive banks and organisations. And it's quite interesting because you see a number of 16-year-olds, for example, who come from a particular background, which means that they can do unpaid work experience. But another person...
I have an issue with that, unpaid.
But the thing is, they can do unpaid work experience because their parents can afford for them to.
Right, so the ones that are coming from better homes can afford to do that.
Whereas if you're coming from a background that's seen as a lower socioeconomic background,
you can't.
Then you don't have the access to that. That's almost like a luxury that someone from a different background can't afford to do. And then when it's time for them to go into employment and they're looking at who has work experience, or the person who comes from a family, a 2.5 family, typically middle class family, has more work experience than another person who had to actually go and work a retail job as opposed to get work experience in their desired field of working. So I think what you're saying is completely true. There is this different, and it's important as leaders to ensure that even if you do come from a particular background, it's sad to say, but you do need to step out. One thing I love about Precious, and even watching some of the other stuff that you're doing, is that even though where you come from, there are limitations, you didn't allow it to limit you. Yeah. There has to be an element of young people being proactive in this generation so that they're seeking out opportunities that aren't naturally afforded to them.
Absolutely. And that's why when I heard you speak, Precious, I was taken aback. She does poetry. She speaks about the truth and what she sees growing up and in her area. And the reason why I was touched by it was because when I was growing up, I saw the same things and I was saying the same things. But the one thing I made sure that I did differently was that I went to seek the opportunities that I wanted. And that's why I think being in a position that you are is so precious, and seeing what you see is so precious, because if you can see what you want, there's people like me and there's people like Sarah who will happily give a helping hand. But for the other 16-year-olds out there, it's a matter of activism. You need to stand up, know that you're a leader, know that your voice counts, and then actively seek for people like myself, people like Sarah, who will happily give advice and will support you and give a helping hand, because that's the only way we're going to start seeing more social mobility in this country and seeing more cohesion. Yeah. We have a cohesion issue. Yeah. People are scared or unwilling to give advice to a peer or to someone who looks like them for fear of competition. And we will not get anywhere like that, right, Sarah?
There's this saying that I love, and it says, once you manage to climb up the ladder, don't forget to pull other people up once you're up there.
Absolutely.
And I think the reality is there's this thing with the older generation saying, well, I had to work, so you have to. Well, no. The struggles that you went through, I would hope that you would teach me how to navigate my way through life so that I don't have to go through their struggles. So it's really important for us, because even in the workplace, diversity in thought is so important. If you hire people who only come from a private school background, they're going to have a particular way of thinking. So it's really important that the workplace is diverse. Absolutely. And reaching out to talent from, that is unconventional is important, but also for young people to do their best at being proactive.
And also providing opportunities, but not just giving the opportunity, but giving the access to the opportunity.
Exactly.
Because as you said, some people can afford to get work experience because their parents can pay, others can't. And so being mindful of those challenges so you can provide. So right, to wrap it up, Precious, what are your top tips to your fellow 16-year-olds out there who have a voice, who are just like you, who want to speak out but are a bit scared and who feel a bit held back? What would you say to them?
I would say that fear is your worst enemy. Never, ever, ever be afraid to speak. That's something that I had to learn to myself. Never, ever be afraid to speak, because there's people's voices that actually need to be heard. Even now, like, I'm not really a talkative kind of person, but I understand that with my poetry, that's my voice being heard. That's my preaching. That's the way that I'm gonna reach the world. So even if like I'm not like doing politics like that, I know that if with poetry I can take over the world, because that's my voice being heard. So if poetry is the way that I'm gonna do it, it's gonna be the way that I'm gonna do it. And don't feel like you should ever be limited to anything that or anywhere that you've come from. Because like I said before, limitation is only a mindset. So it's just you stepping out of that mindset and stepping into a different mindset that will allow you to be able to pursue the person that you actually want to be. And I feel like young leadership is so important to saving generations.
Yeah, 100%.
And you are a leader, so we need more of you. We need more Preciouses, but we also need to help people like Precious and me and Sarah. Right, Sarah, top tips. What are your top tips to your leaders who are doing things that you're doing, you know, who are top level, who want to give back, who want to help the world? How would you suggest they go about doing that?
In all honesty, just remember where you started. Remember where you started. Be empathetic, because the truth is, it is harder. For people coming up now, it is harder. For me, coming up to the level that I aspire to be to, it is harder. It is harder. So I would say never forget that. And you hit the nail on the head, and I'm not going to replicate what you said. But fear, you know, you have to be courageous in whatever you do. If you don't stand out and do it, no one else will.
Absolutely. And I'll just regurgitate what they've both said. From my perspective, just, you know, be bold, be courageous, and believe in you, because if you don't believe in you, no one else will. If you don't listen to you, no one else will. So really stand up, believe in you, and know that you can change the world. And this has been Women in Politics. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I think this one is a historic one. Look out for Sarah, look out for Precious, and look out for myself, because we're coming and we're changing the world. We've been Women in Politics. Thank you.